My name is Margot, and I'm 23 years old. Right now, I'm standing outside my childhood home in suburban Pennsylvania on a freezing November night, my entire life stuffed into 2 trash bags. My father just slammed the door in my face after calling me a disgrace to the family name. I can still hear my mother's cruel laughter echoing through the walls, sharp and cold like the wind cutting through my thin jacket. They declared me worthless, a failure, because I refused to marry the wealthy investor they chose for me. What they don't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine, is that I've been secretly building a tech startup for the past 2 years, and just yesterday I received a $75,000 seed investment. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. If you've ever felt underestimated by the people who were supposed to love you most, hit that like button, and please subscribe, because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about family, success, and survival. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this turns out. Growing up in the Patterson household meant living in a shadow I could never escape, no matter how hard I tried or how much I achieved. My younger brother Brock was always the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. Every report card I brought home, every achievement I earned, was immediately compared to whatever Brock had accomplished that week. When I made honor roll, my father Harold would nod absently and say something like, "Well, Brock made first team on the basketball squad. That takes real dedication." When I won the school spelling bee at age 12, my mother Beatrice barely looked up from her magazine before reminding me that ladies don't show off their intelligence, it makes them undesirable to quality men. The worst incident happened when I was 14 years old. I had spent 6 months working on a science fair project about renewable energy applications in residential buildings. I poured everything into that project, staying up late every night, using money from my part-time job at the library to buy materials. When I won the regional science fair, beating out students from 15 other schools, I was absolutely thrilled. I rushed home with the trophy and the ribbon, bursting through the door, ready to finally get the recognition I craved from my parents. Instead, I found the house empty except for a note on the kitchen counter. Gone to Brock's basketball game, back late, leftovers in fridge. They had known about the science fair for months. I had reminded them that morning at breakfast. But Brock's game, just another regular season game that didn't even matter for rankings, took priority. I sat alone in that kitchen, holding my trophy, crying until I couldn't breathe properly. That was the night I started to understand that nothing I did would ever be enough. My father owned a successful real estate development company, Patterson Properties, which had been building strip malls and residential complexes across 3 counties for 20 years. He always talked about Brock as his natural successor, praising my brother's instincts and business sense, even though Brock barely maintained a C average and spent most of his time partying. My mother was deeply embedded in the local social scene, sitting on charity boards and hosting fundraising galas, always obsessed with appearances and status. To her, I was a disappointing daughter because I preferred reading about computer programming to attending debutante balls. She would sigh dramatically whenever her friends asked about me, waving her hand dismissively and saying something vague about me being a late bloomer who would hopefully settle down soon. Every achievement I earned was dismissed as a nice hobby. When I graduated summa cum laude from community college with a degree in computer science, my father's only comment was, "That's nice, dear. But when are you going to focus on finding a proper husband?" When I told them I wanted to pursue a master's degree, my mother actually laughed and said, "Education makes women intimidating. You're already going to have trouble finding someone willing to overlook your difficult personality." I learned to stop sharing my dreams with them, to keep my ambitions locked away where their criticism couldn't reach. Then, when I turned 21, everything got exponentially worse. My parents announced at a family dinner that they had found the perfect match for me. His name was Sterling, he was 42 years old, and he was an investment banker with serious money and connections. They presented this arranged marriage like it was some generous gift they were bestowing upon their difficult daughter. Sterling came to dinner the following week, and I hated him immediately. He was arrogant and controlling, talking about his previous relationships like business deals that hadn't worked out due to the woman's inadequacies. He made inappropriate comments about training his future wife to meet his standards, about how young wives were more moldable and appreciative. When I tried to politely decline, saying I wasn't ready for marriage, my parents were furious. My father pulled me into his office after Sterling left and told me I was being selfish and ungrateful. He said Sterling was offering me a lifestyle most women would kill for, security and status I certainly couldn't achieve on my own. My mother added that I was getting older, my looks wouldn't last forever, and this might be my only chance at a respectable marriage. When I still refused, they began a campaign of pressure that lasted 2 years. Constant comments about my failure to launch, about being a burden on the family, about embarrassing them in front of their social circle. They invited Sterling to family events without asking me, created situations where we were forced together, all while I smiled through gritted teeth and plotted my escape. During those 2 years of escalating tension, I was secretly teaching myself advanced coding at night after my parents went to bed. I had an idea for an app, a platform that would connect freelance workers with microtasks in their local area, making it easier for people to earn supplemental income through small jobs. I worked on it obsessively, knowing it was my ticket out of the suffocating life my parents had planned for me. I used library computers, free Wi-Fi at coffee shops, anything to keep my project hidden from my family. I networked at tech meetups, refined my pitch, submitted applications to startup incubators and venture capital firms. Every rejection made me more determined. Every small success I kept locked away like a secret treasure. But secrets have a way of coming out, especially when you have family members actively looking for ammunition to use against you. The night everything exploded started like any other dinner. My parents had invited Sterling over again, the 4th time that month. He sat across from me, talking about honeymoon destinations like our engagement was already settled. I excused myself early, claiming a headache, and went to my room to work on my pitch deck. I had a meeting scheduled with a venture capital firm called Innovate Forward the next morning, my biggest opportunity yet. I was so focused on perfecting my presentation that I didn't hear my door open. I didn't notice Brock standing behind me until he spoke. Brock's voice cut through my concentration like a knife. "Well, well, well, what do we have here?" I spun around in my desk chair, instinctively closing my laptop, but it was too late. He had already seen enough of my screen to know I was working on something I had deliberately kept hidden from the family. My heart hammered in my chest as he smiled, that cruel smile he had perfected over years of getting away with everything. "This looks interesting, big sister. Does this have anything to do with why you're always so busy, always disappearing to the library or coffee shops?" I tried to brush it off, told him it was nothing, just a hobby project. But Brock wasn't stupid despite his poor grades. He could smell blood in the water. He left my room without another word, and I knew with absolute certainty that he was going straight to our parents. I sat frozen for maybe 10 seconds, my mind racing through options, before I heard my father's heavy footsteps on the stairs. Harold burst into my room without knocking, his face already red with anger, with Beatrice and Brock close behind. Sterling brought up the rear, looking confused but intrigued by the drama unfolding. My father demanded to see what I was working on, his voice booming loud enough that I flinched. When I hesitated, he physically grabbed my laptop off the desk and opened it. The confrontation that followed was worse than anything I could have imagined. My father scrolled through my business plan, my financial projections, my pitch deck, his face growing more furious with each slide. He started screaming about how I had been disrespecting the family, wasting my time on childish fantasies when I should have been preparing to be Sterling's wife. My mother chimed in with her own brand of venom, calling me an embarrassment, claiming I had ruined Sterling's patience with my difficult behavior and ridiculous delusions. She said no serious investor would ever take a 23-year-old girl seriously, that I was humiliating myself, and by extension, humiliating them. Then Brock delivered his masterstroke. He stepped forward, that smirk still plastered on his face, and casually mentioned that he had been monitoring my laptop activity for months. He had installed spyware back in September, had been reading my emails, tracking my meetings, watching me build something he knew would threaten his position as the favorite child. This was the first major betrayal, the moment I realized my own brother had been actively sabotaging me out of pure jealousy. He told our parents about every meeting I had attended, every networking event, every late night I had spent coding. He presented it all like evidence of my betrayal, my deception, my unworthiness. Brock's motivation became crystal clear in that moment. He was terrified of me, despite all the golden child treatment, despite being handed everything on a silver platter. He knew deep down that I was smarter and more driven than he would ever be. If I succeeded with my startup, if I made something of myself without the family's help or approval, it would expose him as the mediocre leech he truly was. He needed to eliminate me as competition for the inheritance, for our father's business, for any position of respect in the family hierarchy. So he had spent months gathering ammunition, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Sterling decided to insert himself into the situation by stepping forward and trying to grab my arm, his grip tight and possessive. He said something about how this proved I needed a strong husband to guide me, to keep me focused on appropriate pursuits. I yanked my arm away and told him to never touch me again. The words came out stronger than I expected, fueled by years of suppressed rage. I told Sterling I would never marry him, not in a million years, not if he were the last man on earth. I told him he was a controlling creep who wanted a servant, not a wife, and I would rather die alone than spend one day shackled to him. The room went silent for about 3 seconds. Then my father issued his ultimatum. His voice was cold and final, the voice he used when closing business deals he knew the other party couldn't refuse. Marry Sterling next month as planned, or leave this house forever. No middle ground, no negotiation, no time to think it over. Choose right now. My mother stood beside him with her arms crossed, nodding along, adding that if I left I would be completely cut off. No financial support, no family connections, nothing. They would tell everyone I had a mental breakdown, that I was unstable and unreliable. I would be ruined socially and professionally. I looked at each of them in turn. My father, who had never once told me he was proud of me. My mother, who saw me as nothing more than a bargaining chip in her social climbing games. Brock, who had betrayed me to protect his own fragile ego. Sterling, who thought he could buy a woman like purchasing a car. And I realized I had never really had a family at all. I had been living with strangers who wore the masks of parents and brother but felt nothing for me except disappointment and contempt. I chose freedom. I walked to my closet and started pulling out clothes, shoving them into a duffel bag I used for gym clothes. My mother started shrieking about how I was making the biggest mistake of my life, how I would come crawling back within a week, begging for forgiveness. My father told Brock to go get trash bags from the kitchen, said if I was going to act like trash I could carry my belongings like trash. They literally stuffed my clothes, my books, my laptop, everything I grabbed into 2 black garbage bags. My mother's final words as they pushed me toward the door were venomous and deliberate. Go live in the streets where you belong, you useless failure. You'll realize how good you had it here when you're sleeping in a gutter. They shoved me out the front door with enough force that I stumbled down the porch steps. I heard the lock click behind me immediately, final and absolute. Through the window, I watched them turn off the lights in the entryway, like I had never existed at all. The November night was brutal. The temperature had dropped to 38 degrees Fahrenheit, and my jacket was still inside the house. I stood on that sidewalk with 2 trash bags, looking at the home I had grown up in, feeling absolutely nothing for the people inside. The only thing I felt was a fierce, burning determination to prove them wrong about everything. I walked for 6 miles through the freezing night, my hands numb from gripping the trash bags, my breath visible in the cold air. Every step felt surreal, like I was walking through someone else's nightmare. I had my phone, but the battery was at 15%, and I had exactly $43 in my wallet. My bank account held maybe $250 more, money I had saved from the library job I had worked during college. It wasn't much, but it was mine, earned without any help from the Patterson family. The streets were mostly empty at that hour, just the occasional car passing by, probably people wondering why a young woman was wandering alone with garbage bags in the middle of the night. I made it to Hazel's apartment complex just after midnight. Hazel had been my closest friend since community college, one of the few people who knew about my startup dreams and actually encouraged them. She worked as a paralegal at a small law firm, lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that was safe enough but definitely not fancy. I stood outside her building for a full minute before I could make myself press the buzzer, humiliation washing over me. I didn't want to burden her, didn't want to show up like some pathetic charity case, but I had nowhere else to go. When her voice came through the intercom, groggy and confused, I almost couldn't speak. "Hazel, it's Margot. I need help." She buzzed me up immediately without asking questions. When she opened her apartment door and saw me standing there with trash bags and tears streaming down my face, she pulled me inside and wrapped me in the tightest hug I had ever experienced. She didn't make me explain right away, just guided me to her couch, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and made hot tea. Only after I had warmed up enough to stop shaking did she gently ask what happened. I told her everything, the whole horrible story spilling out between sobs. Hazel listened without interrupting, her expression growing more furious with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment before she spoke. Her voice was steady and sure. "You're staying here as long as you need to. We'll figure this out together." Then she said something that made me start crying all over again. "Margot, you're the strongest person I know. If anyone can turn this nightmare into something amazing, it's you." Her faith in me, especially in that moment when I felt like the biggest failure on the planet, was like oxygen to someone drowning. I slept on her couch that night, and for the first time in years, I felt safe. The next morning, I woke up and remembered my meeting with Innovate Forward, the venture capital firm. The meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock, just 8 hours away. I looked like I had been hit by a truck. My eyes were swollen from crying, my clothes were wrinkled from the trash bag, and I had no professional outfit that wasn't back at my parents' house. Hazel insisted we go shopping, lent me money for a simple blazer and blouse from a discount store. I cleaned myself up as best I could, rehearsed my pitch in the mirror, and walked into that meeting running on pure adrenaline and spite. The meeting with Jasper, the 35-year-old partner at Innovate Forward, went better than I ever could have hoped. He loved the concept, asked sharp questions that showed he actually understood the market opportunity, and seemed genuinely impressed by the working prototype I had built. At the end of our 90-minute discussion, he leaned back in his chair and smiled. "We want to invest $75,000 seed funding, standard terms for equity." I almost fainted right there in the conference room. I walked out of that building in a daze, holding a term sheet that represented everything I had worked for, proof that I wasn't crazy or delusional or any of the things my parents had called me. But there was a catch, and it was a significant one. Due to legal paperwork and banking requirements, the money wouldn't be accessible for 10 business days. That meant I had less than $300 in personal funds to survive on for 2 weeks. The business account had the $75,000, but I couldn't touch it yet. I couldn't use it for rent, food, transportation, any of the basic necessities I needed immediately. I was celebrating the biggest professional win of my life, while simultaneously facing the very real possibility of homelessness. I got a job the next day, waiting tables at a diner called Rosie's Place. It was the kind of establishment where the coffee was always hot, the breakfast was served all day, and the tips were decent if you worked hard. The manager hired me on the spot when I mentioned I had food service experience from high school. I started working double shifts immediately, breakfast through lunch, then coming back for the dinner rush. My feet ached constantly, my back hurt from carrying heavy trays, but every dollar in tips was a small victory. I was surviving on my own terms, without my parents' money or approval, and that felt powerful even through the exhaustion. One of the other waitresses at Rosie's was a woman named Wanda, 58 years old, with a smoker's raspy voice and eyes that had seen everything. She was the kind of person who seemed tough as nails on the surface, but had a heart bigger than Texas underneath. During my first week, she noticed I was always the last one to eat, always ordering the cheapest items on the menu, always looking exhausted beyond what the job warranted. One night after our shift, she pulled me aside and asked me directly if I was okay. Something about the way she asked, without judgment or pity, made me tell her the truth. Wanda listened to my story while we sat in the empty diner, splitting a piece of pie. When I finished, she nodded slowly and told me her own story. She had escaped an abusive marriage 30 years ago with nothing but the clothes on her back and her 2 young kids. She had worked 3 jobs to support them, had slept in her car more times than she could count, had been told by her own family that she was making a mistake leaving her husband. But she had survived, raised her kids to be good people, and built a life she was proud of. "You're going to make it," she told me. "I can always tell who has the steel inside them. And honey, you're made of nothing but steel." Wanda became my second ally, a mentor figure who gave me advice on everything from budgeting to dealing with difficult customers to not letting the world break my spirit. Between shifts at the diner, I worked on app development wherever I could find Wi-Fi and a quiet corner. The public library became my office, various coffee shops became my meeting rooms, and Hazel's couch became my bed. I survived on cheap ramen and day-old pastries the diner let me take home. I was constantly exhausted, running on maybe 4 hours of sleep a night, but I was also more focused than I had ever been in my life. Every line of code I wrote, every feature I added to the app, every test I ran was proof that I was building something real. One week after being thrown out, I was at a coffee shop working on my laptop when I saw them. Brock and Sterling, sitting in a booth near the back, clearly searching for me. I ducked behind my laptop screen, my heart racing, and watched them show my photo to the barista. They were systematically checking every place they thought I might hide, and they were getting closer. I packed up my things as quietly as possible and slipped out the side exit before they noticed me. I texted Hazel immediately to warn her, and she confirmed they had come to her apartment building the day before, asking the doorman if he had seen me. That night, lying on Hazel's couch while she slept in her bedroom, I realized my family wasn't going to let me go quietly. They were actively hunting me down, and I had no idea what they were planning when they found me. I stared at the ceiling, watching shadows from the streetlights outside, and understood that this was just the beginning of the fight. They had thrown me out, but they weren't done trying to destroy me. I needed to be smarter, more careful, more strategic. I needed to stop running and start planning my counterattack. The next morning, Hazel came out of her bedroom looking worried, her phone in her hand. She showed me a Facebook post that Beatrice had made, shared publicly to her 800 friends. My mother's post was a masterpiece of manipulation, complete with an old photo of me from high school. "My heart is breaking," she had written. "Our daughter Margot has been struggling with mental health issues and has disappeared. She's confused and may seem normal but needs medication and professional help. If anyone sees her, please contact us immediately. We just want to bring our baby home safely." The post already had over 100 comments, people offering prayers and promises to keep an eye out, people who had no idea they were participating in a character assassination. That post was the second major attack, a calculated move to destroy my credibility before I could establish myself independently. If they spread the narrative that I was mentally unstable, no one would believe my version of events. Potential employers would hesitate to hire me. Potential investors would question my judgment. Potential friends would wonder if I was reliable. My mother knew exactly what she was doing, weaponizing social concern to isolate and discredit me. Within hours, I started receiving messages from old acquaintances asking if I was okay, if I needed help, their tone suggesting they believed my mother's lies. But it got worse. My father and Sterling were using every resource at their disposal to find me and force me back. Harold contacted the police and filed a missing persons report, feeding them the same story about my supposed mental instability. He showed them Beatrice's Facebook post as evidence, claimed I might be a danger to myself, played the concerned father role perfectly. The police took the report seriously because Harold Patterson was a respected businessman in the community, a man with connections and credibility. They added me to their system as a vulnerable missing person, which meant if I got stopped for anything, even a traffic violation, I would be flagged. My parents went further, systematically contacting everyone who might have information about me. They called my former employers at the library, telling them I had stolen money and asking if I had been in touch. They contacted community college, claiming I owed them money and asking for my records. They reached out to mutual friends and distant relatives, spinning their narrative about my breakdown and disappearance. Beatrice posted updates every few days, each one more dramatic than the last, building a public story of a troubled daughter who had rejected her family's loving support. The social media campaign was devastatingly effective. People who barely knew me were sharing the posts, adding their own commentary about mental health awareness and the importance of finding missing people. I watched my reputation being shredded in real time, unable to defend myself without revealing my location. If I posted publicly that I was fine, that my parents were lying, it would confirm where I was active online and give them another way to track me. I felt trapped between silence and self-defense. Then Sterling made his move, and it was ruthless. He used his connections in the financial industry to freeze my personal bank account. The bank called me to inform me that my account had been flagged due to suspicious activity, and since Sterling claimed we were engaged and he was protecting shared assets, they had to follow proper procedure before releasing my funds. It was complete nonsense legally, but banks err on the side of caution with fraud claims, especially when the claim comes from someone with Sterling's credentials and wealth. The $300 I had scraped together from diner tips was now inaccessible, locked away while the bank investigated a fraudulent claim. This was the third attack. Direct financial sabotage designed to make me desperate enough to return. Without access to my account, I couldn't pay for anything beyond what I earned day to day in cash tips. I couldn't rent an apartment, couldn't buy professional clothes for meetings, couldn't afford bus fare to networking events. Sterling knew exactly how to squeeze me, how to make survival so difficult that crawling back would start to look appealing. When I called the bank to dispute the freeze, they told me it could take up to 30 days to resolve, and I would need to appear in person with documentation proving the engagement claim was false. I was reeling from these coordinated attacks when I got a call from Jasper at Innovate Forward. His voice was concerned, careful, nothing like the enthusiasm he had shown during our meeting. "Margot, we need to talk about some things that have come to our attention." My stomach dropped. He told me that members of his firm's investment committee had seen the social media posts about me, had received calls from someone claiming to be my father, expressing concern about my judgment and stability. The firm was now questioning whether I was a reliable investment, whether my personal situation made me too high risk. I explained everything to Jasper, the whole truth about my parents, the forced marriage, the abuse, the smear campaign. To his credit, he listened carefully and said he believed me. But he also explained the reality of the venture capital world. His partners were conservative, risk-averse, worried about anything that could impact their portfolio companies. They needed reassurance that I was competent and stable, and right now the public narrative said otherwise. Unless I could somehow counter my parents' claims and prove I was the one telling the truth, the investment committee might vote to rescind the offer. Then came a betrayal I hadn't seen coming. Tamara, a friend from community college who I had occasionally gotten coffee with, called me out of nowhere. She said she had seen the Facebook posts and was worried about me, asked if we could meet up to talk. Something felt off about the call, the way she was pushing to know where I was staying, but I was desperate for friendly contact and I told her I was crashing with Hazel temporarily. The next day, Hazel got a visit from Harold, who demanded to know if I was staying there and threatened to call the police if she didn't cooperate. Hazel stood her ground magnificently, told him to get a warrant, and slammed the door in his face. But the damage was done. I later found out through mutual connections that Tamara had immediately called my parents after our conversation, offering them information in exchange for a job opportunity at Patterson Properties. She wanted to work in their marketing department, and thought turning me in was a good way to prove her loyalty. This was the second major betrayal. discovering that someone I had considered a friend valued a potential job more than basic human decency. It made me question everyone, wonder who else in my life might sell me out for the right price. The walls were closing in from every direction. My parents were spreading lies that were damaging my reputation and my business prospects. Sterling had frozen my bank account, leaving me broke. Jasper and his firm were reconsidering their investment. People I thought were friends were giving information to my enemies. And through it all, I was working doubles at the diner, trying to develop my app, trying to survive on a few hours of sleep and cheap food, trying not to completely fall apart under the pressure. I was so tired, so scared, so angry that I wanted to scream. But I couldn't afford to break down. I had to keep fighting, keep moving forward, because stopping meant they won. Jasper called me 72 hours after our last conversation, and I knew from his tone that the news wasn't good. The investment committee had voted to place the funding on hold, pending resolution of the concerns about my stability and reliability. He was apologetic, said he had argued hard on my behalf, but the other partners were spooked by Sterling's interference. Apparently, Sterling had contacted Innovate Forward directly, introduced himself as my concerned fiancé, showed them the police missing persons report, and painted a picture of me as someone having a severe mental health crisis who needed intervention rather than investment capital. Sterling had played his role perfectly, positioning himself as the caring partner trying to help his troubled fiancée get the treatment she needed. He never directly said, "Don't invest in her," which would have been too obvious. Instead, he expressed concern about whether I was in the right headspace to run a company, wondered aloud if the stress of entrepreneurship might be contributing to my breakdown, suggested that maybe I needed time to focus on my health before taking on such ambitious projects. It was character assassination wrapped in false concern, and it was devastatingly effective. Jasper told me I had 72 hours to provide some kind of proof that I was competent, that the narrative my family was spinning was false, or the investment committee would vote to formally rescind the term sheet. Once that happened, the $75,000 would disappear, and with it any hope of launching my app in time to make it viable. The market window for my idea was limited. Competitors could emerge at any time, and delays could mean the difference between success and obsolescence. I was watching my dream die in slow motion, killed by people who claimed to love me. That same day, Brock showed up at Rosie's place during the lunch rush. I was carrying a tray loaded with plates when I saw him walk through the door, and I nearly dropped everything. He looked around the diner with obvious disdain, his expensive clothes and entitled posture completely out of place among the working-class customers. When he spotted me, he smiled that cruel smile and walked straight to my section. I wanted to run, wanted to hide, but I was trapped by the needs of my other tables and the watchful eye of my manager. Brock sat down in a booth and loudly announced to anyone within earshot that he was there to bring his mentally ill sister home. He said I had stopped taking my medication, that the family was desperately worried about me, that I was delusional and needed professional help. Customers started staring, whispering to each other, and I felt humiliation burn through me like acid. I told him quietly to leave, but he just ordered coffee and kept talking, kept performing his concerned brother act for the audience. He described elaborate fictional symptoms I supposedly had, medication I supposedly needed, doctor's appointments I supposedly missed. My manager, Claude, a man in his 50s who ran the diner with strict efficiency, came over to see what the commotion was about. Brock immediately launched into his story again, telling Claude that I was unstable, unreliable, potentially dangerous. He said the family had filed a police report, made it sound like I was some kind of fugitive who needed to be returned to proper supervision. Claude looked at me with uncertainty, clearly wondering if any of this was true, and I could see the calculation happening in his eyes. Was I worth the potential drama and liability? The answer was no. Claude pulled me aside after Brock finally left and told me he couldn't keep me on staff. He said he ran a family establishment, couldn't afford to have police involvement or unstable employees scaring away customers. He said he was sorry, but he had to think about his business first. I was fired on the spot, told to collect my tips from that shift and not come back. Just like that, I lost my only source of income. This was the fifth attack, the systematic destruction of my ability to earn money and support myself while trying to build my company. I left the diner with $83 in tips, the only money I had to my name since Sterling had frozen my bank account. Hazel had been amazing, letting me stay with her rent-free, but even her generosity had limits. Her landlord had seen the Facebook posts, recognized me from the photos, and told Hazel that if she was harboring an unstable person, he would have grounds to evict her. He gave her a week to resolve the situation or face eviction proceedings. I couldn't let Hazel lose her apartment because of me. She had already done more than anyone could reasonably expect, and I wouldn't repay her kindness by destroying her housing security. I packed my trash bags again that evening, everything I owned, fitting into 2 black plastic sacks just like the night my parents threw me out. Hazel cried and tried to convince me to stay, said she would fight the landlord, but I refused to drag her down with me. I hugged her tight and thanked her for being the kind of friend most people only dream about having. Then I walked out into the cold again. No job, no home, $83 to my name, and a tech startup that was about to lose its funding. I spent that night in a 24-hour laundromat, feeding quarters into a dryer to keep warm, buying burnt coffee from the vending machine to stay awake. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the smell of detergent was overwhelming, but at least it was warm and safe. I sat on a plastic chair with my laptop, trying to work on my app, but I couldn't focus. Despair kept creeping in, whispering that maybe my parents were right, maybe I was a failure, maybe I should just give up and accept the life they wanted for me. That was my rock-bottom moment, sitting in a laundromat at 3 a.m, seriously contemplating calling my parents and surrendering. I pulled out my phone and stared at my father's number, my thumb hovering over the call button. It would be so easy to end this nightmare. Just apologize, agree to marry Sterling, accept my place as the obedient daughter who did what she was told. I would have a roof over my head, food in my stomach, an end to the constant fear and exhaustion. All I had to do was sacrifice every dream I had ever had and become a possession instead of a person. I don't know how long I sat there, balanced on the edge of that decision, long enough that I started to feel disconnected from my own body, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. Then the door to the laundromat opened, and Wanda walked in. She worked a night shift at a nearby 24-hour diner and had stopped by to wash her uniforms. When she saw me sitting there with tears streaming down my face, she walked over and without a word slapped me across the face. It wasn't a hard slap, just enough to snap me out of my spiral. Then she sat down next to me and said, "Don't you dare give up now. You think I didn't have moments like this? Nights when I thought about going back to my ex-husband because at least I knew what that hell looked like? But you know what I learned? The people who are trying to break you are terrified of who you'll become if you survive. Your family is coming at you this hard because they know you're strong enough to make it without them, and that scares them to death." Wanda told me about a lawyer she knew named Rhonda who did pro bono work for women in crisis situations. She said Rhonda specialized in cases involving family abuse and coercive control, had helped dozens of women escape situations similar to mine. Wanda pulled out her phone and called Rhonda right there at 3 a.m, woke her up, and explained my situation in blunt terms. When she handed me the phone, Rhonda's voice was alert and professional despite the hour. "Meet me at my office at 9 a.m. Bring any documentation you have. We're going to fight back." That conversation, that slap, Wanda's fierce belief in me when I had stopped believing in myself, pulled me back from the edge. I wasn't going to surrender. I wasn't going to let Harold and Beatrice and Brock and Sterling win. They had underestimated me, mistaken my kindness for weakness, my patience for compliance. They thought they could break me with lies and sabotage and isolation. They were wrong. I was done playing defense. It was time to go on the attack. Rhonda's office was in a building that had seen better days, sandwiched between a bail bondsman and a tax preparation service, but the woman herself radiated competence and controlled fury. She was in her mid-40s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing, and the kind of calm demeanor that came from years of dealing with terrible situations. She listened to my entire story without interrupting, taking detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said something that gave me hope for the first time in weeks. What your parents did is legally actionable on multiple fronts, and we're going to make them pay for every single attack. Rhonda explained that filing a false police report is a crime, that defamation can result in civil damages, that financial abuse through Sterling's account freeze was another legal violation. She said my parents had created a documented trail of their abuse, and we could use it against them. But first, we needed to gather evidence, lots of it, enough to bury their credibility and expose their true motivations. Rhonda worked on a sliding scale for fees, and since I had no money, she agreed to take my case pro bono, with the understanding that if we won damages, she would get a percentage. We started methodically building my defense. Hazel provided a sworn statement about everything she had witnessed, about my parents showing up at her building making threats, about the timeline of events that proved I was coherent and functional. Claude, despite having fired me, was willing to provide security camera footage from the diner showing Brock's harassment, proving that he had deliberately caused a scene to get me fired. The footage showed Brock clearly performing for the customers, his body language aggressive, his voice raised, while I remained calm and professional throughout. It contradicted the narrative that I was the unstable one. Wanda connected me with a women's shelter called Safe Harbor that had private rooms and reliable Wi-Fi. The shelter was designed for women escaping domestic violence and coercive family situations, and they understood my need for safety and privacy. The room was small, barely bigger than a closet, with a single bed and a desk, but it was clean and warm and, most importantly, secure. The shelter had protocols to protect residents from being found by their abusers, which meant my parents couldn't just show up demanding to see me. I finally had a safe base of operations to work from. From the shelter, I contacted Jasper and asked for one more meeting. I explained that I was taking legal action against my family, that I had documentation proving their claims were false, and that I needed him to hear the full truth before making any final decisions. To his credit, he agreed immediately. We met at a coffee shop, and I brought Rhonda with me. I laid out everything, all the evidence we had gathered, the timeline of abuse, the documented lies. Jasper listened carefully, and I could see his expression shift from uncertainty to anger on my behalf. Then Jasper revealed something that changed the entire game. His firm had done a background check on Sterling as part of their due diligence into the investment concerns, standard practice when someone makes serious claims about a potential portfolio founder. What they found was disturbing. Sterling had a pattern, a documented history of targeting young women from wealthy families, getting engaged to them, using the engagement to gain access to family businesses and money, then leaving wreckage in his wake when the relationships ended. He had been engaged 4 times in the past 15 years, and every single engagement had ended badly for the woman involved. Jasper put me in touch with one of Sterling's previous victims, a woman named Loretta, who was now 38 years old. Loretta agreed to speak with me, and her story was chilling in its similarity to mine. Sterling had pursued her when she was 25. Her family owned a successful restaurant chain, and he convinced her parents he was the perfect match. When Loretta started to have doubts and tried to break off the engagement, Sterling retaliated by sabotaging her family's business through his financial connections, spreading rumors that damaged their reputation, making it nearly impossible for them to get credit or investors. Her family lost 3 restaurants before they managed to stabilize, and Loretta's relationship with her parents never recovered, because they blamed her for bringing Sterling into their lives. Loretta was willing to provide a statement about Sterling's pattern of behavior, willing to testify if needed about his tactics of manipulation and financial abuse. She put me in touch with 2 other women who had similar experiences, women who had been too afraid or ashamed to come forward before but were willing to speak up now. Suddenly, we had evidence that Sterling was a predator with a system, that his interest in me had nothing to do with love or partnership, and everything to do with gaining control over Patterson properties through marriage. Rhonda's legal strategy started taking shape. We would file a defamation suit against Harold and Beatrice for the false social media posts and police reports. We would file for an injunction against Sterling to unfreeze my bank account and cease his harassment. We would document everything and create a paper trail that would protect me from future attacks. But even as we built our case, I knew my parents wouldn't stop. They were too invested in their narrative, too committed to controlling me. I continued working on my app development whenever I had time, usually late at night after dealing with legal preparations all day. I was running on adrenaline and spite, barely sleeping, surviving on the communal meals at the shelter and the occasional sandwich Wanda would bring me from her diner. Every line of code I wrote felt like an act of rebellion, proof that I was still moving forward despite everything they had done to stop me. Then came the third betrayal, and it hurt worse than the others because I genuinely hadn't seen it coming. My cousin Darlene, who I had always thought was neutral in family politics, called me out of nowhere. She claimed she wanted to check on me, said she didn't believe the social media posts, asked if we could meet for coffee. Something in my gut said not to trust her. But I was exhausted and lonely, and I wanted to believe I still had some family who cared. I agreed to meet her at a cafe near the shelter. Darlene seemed genuinely concerned at first, asking about how I was surviving, sympathizing with my situation. But then she started asking very specific questions about my startup, about the investors, about the technology I was developing. I was vague in my answers, but she was persistent. After the meeting, I felt uneasy, and I mentioned it to Rhonda. Rhonda had me call the shelter and check if anyone had been asking about me. The front desk staff confirmed that a woman matching Darlene's description had come by earlier that day, asking if I was a resident there, claiming to be family. I found out later through a mutual relative that Darlene had been feeding information to Beatrice for weeks in exchange for a promised job in the marketing department at Patterson Properties. She was the one who told my parents about the shelter, about my legal preparations, and most damagingly, about the venture capital investment. She gave them every detail I had stupidly shared during our coffee meeting, arming them with the information they needed to launch their most devastating attack yet. Once my parents knew about the investment and the app, they escalated their campaign to a level I hadn't thought possible. Harold used his extensive network in the real estate and business community to launch a coordinated smear campaign. He personally called property owners throughout a 50-mile radius, telling them I was an unstable tenant who would cause problems, implying legal liability if they rented to me. He positioned it as a friendly warning from one businessman to another, never explicitly saying don't rent to her, just raising concerns and letting the implications do the work. The result was that I was effectively blacklisted from finding permanent housing in the area. Sterling filed a fraudulent civil lawsuit against me, claiming I had stolen joint assets from our engagement. The $300 he had frozen in my account was now characterized as money I had taken from him, and he was suing for return of funds plus damages for emotional distress. The lawsuit was completely baseless. We had never been engaged despite what he told everyone. But frivolous lawsuits don't have to win to be effective. They just have to exist, creating legal fees, consuming time and energy, making my life more complicated and expensive. Beatrice took her social media campaign to new heights, enlisting their church community in the effort to find and rescue their troubled daughter. She gave a tearful testimony during Sunday service about the pain of having a child who rejected her family's love and support. The pastor, who had known our family for decades and never seen behind our perfect facade, dedicated part of his sermon to the importance of honoring your parents and the tragedy of rebellious children who destroy their families. Church members started sharing posts, organizing prayer circles, some even volunteering to help search for me. The combination of my parents' social standing and their performance as grieving parents made their narrative incredibly persuasive. People who had no reason to doubt them, who had only ever seen the public face of the Patterson family, believed every word. I became the villain in a story where I was actually the victim, and there was no easy way to correct that narrative without looking defensive or unstable. If I posted publicly that they were lying, It would seem like exactly the kind of thing a mentally ill person would say. I was trapped in a catch-22 of their creation. Then Brock made his move, and it was the most vicious attack yet. He had hired someone to hack into my email account, probably some college friend who knew computers, and he stole my app development plans. Every document, every line of code, every design mock-up, every business strategy I had created over 2 years of work was now in his possession. I discovered the theft when a beta tester I had been working with mentioned seeing advertisements for a very similar app that was supposedly launching soon. When I investigated, I found Brock's new company, an LLC he had just registered called TaskBridge Solutions. The intellectual property theft was brazen and illegal, but it was also devastatingly effective. Brock had taken my code and was rushing to launch his own version of the app before I could get mine to market. Harold had provided him with $50,000 in startup capital, more than half what I had secured from Jasper, and Brock was using that money to hire developers who could clean up and deploy the stolen code quickly. If his version launched first, mine would look like the copy, like I had stolen from him. The market wouldn't support 2 identical apps, and whoever got there first would dominate. I was in my shelter room when I realized the full scope of what they were doing, and I had a full panic attack for the first time in my life. My chest tightened, I couldn't breathe properly, my vision started to tunnel, and I thought I might actually die right there. The shelter staff helped me through it, talked me down, made me focus on my breathing until the attack passed. But the fear remained. They were going to steal my dream, launch it as their own, and there was nothing I could do to stop them in time. Jasper called with more bad news. The legal team at Innovate Forward was advising delay of the app launch by at least 6 months, the time it would take to resolve Sterling's lawsuit and establish clear ownership of the intellectual property, now that Brock was making competing claims. 6 months would be fatal. Brock's version would launch, capture the market, and even if I eventually won in court and proved the idea was mine, it would be too late. The window of opportunity would be closed. I would be legally vindicated but commercially dead. Then Rhonda delivered the final blow. Harold and Beatrice had petitioned the court for conservatorship over me, claiming I was mentally incompetent to manage my own affairs. They had submitted the police reports, the social media posts, statements from people who believed their narrative, and a recommendation from a psychiatrist they had paid to review the materials and provide an opinion without ever actually examining me. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out, and if they won, they would have legal authority to make all my decisions, access all my money including the business account, and essentially control every aspect of my life. I sat in my tiny shelter room that night, looking at the walls that felt like they were closing in, and I understood what my parents were really doing. This wasn't just about forcing me to marry Sterling anymore. This was about utterly destroying me, breaking me so completely that I would never dare defy them again. They wanted to take my business, my freedom, my identity, everything that made me who I was. They wanted to erase me and replace me with the obedient daughter they had always demanded I be. For the second time, I contemplated giving up. The fight seemed impossible. They had more money, more connections, more social capital. They had coordinated their attacks perfectly, hitting me from multiple angles simultaneously. I was one exhausted 23-year-old woman with minimal resources, facing an onslaught from people who should have been protecting me. How could I possibly win? Wanda found me at my lowest point again, sitting on the floor of my shelter room at 2 a.m, surrounded by legal documents and failed attempts to fix the hacked email account. She had stopped by to drop off food, and when she saw the state I was in, she sat down on the floor next to me. Then she said something that changed my perspective completely. "You've been playing their game, defending yourself against their attacks. It's time to stop defending and start attacking. They're not expecting you to fight back hard because they've always been able to control you. Use that. Surprise them." She was right. I had been so focused on responding to each attack that I hadn't thought strategically about how to go on offense. Rhonda had been building a legal defense, but a defense only works if you survive long enough to use it. I needed to flip the script, take the initiative, force them to respond to my moves instead of constantly responding to theirs. I spent the rest of that night making a plan. A real plan. Not just survival mode, but victory mode. The next morning, I met with Rhonda and laid out a more aggressive legal strategy. Instead of just defending against the conservatorship petition, we would file a comprehensive countersuit immediately. Defamation against both Harold and Beatrice for the false social media posts and statements to police. Harassment charges based on the documented pattern of tracking me down and interfering with my employment. A restraining order against Brock for the email hack and theft of intellectual property. A separate lawsuit against Sterling for the fraudulent account freeze and the baseless civil suit. Rhonda loved the aggressive approach. She said most of her clients were too scared or beaten down to fight back hard. But I had documentation for everything. Witnesses who would testify, and a clear pattern of abuse that would be hard for any judge to ignore. We filed everything at once, a legal bombardment that would force my family to hire lawyers and defend multiple fronts simultaneously. The conservatorship hearing was still scheduled, but now Harold and Beatrice would walk into that courtroom facing their own legal jeopardy. Jasper's legal team filed an emergency injunction against Sterling's lawsuit, presenting evidence that it was filed in bad faith with the sole purpose of disrupting a legitimate business. They submitted statements from Loretta and the other women Sterling had targeted, establishing a pattern of using fraudulent legal action as a weapon against former romantic interests. The judge granted a temporary stay on Sterling's lawsuit pending a hearing on whether it should be dismissed entirely as frivolous. But the most important battle was the race to launch the app before Brock could deploy the stolen version. I worked like someone possessed, pulling 72-hour coding marathons fueled by coffee and rage. I had the advantage of actually understanding the architecture of the app, knowing every line of code intimately, while Brock was relying on hired developers who were trying to reverse engineer stolen materials they didn't fully comprehend. I discovered through a mutual contact that Brock's version was plagued with bugs and errors because he hadn't stolen the complete codebase, just fragments, and the developers he hired were struggling to make it functional. I reached out to my beta testers and asked for an emergency push to get a working version launched as quickly as possible. These were people who had been testing my app for months, who believed in the concept, and who were outraged when I explained what Brock was trying to do. They volunteered their time to help debug, to test features, to provide feedback in real time. What should have taken months was compressed into 2 weeks of frantic collaborative work. I barely slept, existing on naps between coding sessions, but slowly, the app came together into something launch-ready. Meanwhile, I made a decision that terrified me but felt necessary. I reached out to Kelsey, a reporter for a local tech blog who had been covering startup news in the region. I told her I had a story about family sabotage, stolen intellectual property, and a young female founder fighting against coordinated attacks from wealthy relatives trying to destroy her business. Kelsey was immediately interested. She met with me, verified my claims through the legal documents and witness statements Rhonda had collected, and decided to run with the story. The article Kelsey published was titled, "Local Woman Fights Family Empire to Launch Startup After Being Disowned for Refusing Arranged Marriage." It laid out everything. The forced engagement to Sterling, the abuse I had endured, being thrown out with trash bags, the false police reports and social media campaigns, the intellectual property theft, the legal battles. Kelsey had done her homework, interviewing Hazel and Wanda and Loretta, getting statements from the shelter about my residence there, even tracking down the diner manager Claude who admitted he had fired me based on false information from my brother. The article went viral within 48 hours. Local news picked it up, then regional outlets, then national tech blogs interested in the story of a female founder overcoming extreme adversity. My social media mentions exploded with messages of support from complete strangers, from other people who had been disowned by their families, from women who had escaped forced marriages, from entrepreneurs who had faced sabotage. The narrative my parents had so carefully constructed was demolished by the truth, and public opinion shifted dramatically in my favor. Sterling's reputation was destroyed almost overnight. The article mentioned his pattern of targeting young women, and Loretta went public with her full story in a follow-up piece. Within days, 5 more women came forward with similar experiences. Women who had been too afraid or ashamed to speak up before but now felt safe adding their voices. Sterling's investment firm dropped him immediately, cutting ties to protect their own reputation. His professional network evaporated as people distanced themselves from the scandal. Harold's real estate business faced immediate backlash. Several clients canceled contracts, not wanting to be associated with someone accused of abusing his daughter and filing false police reports. Local business leaders who had respected him started questioning his character. The church where Beatrice had given her tearful testimony learned the truth, and several prominent members publicly apologized for participating in the smear campaign without knowing the full story. Beatrice lost her positions on 2 charity boards, quietly asked to resign to avoid embarrassing the organizations. The conservatorship hearing became a turning point. My parents walked into that courtroom expecting a routine proceeding where they would be granted control over their troubled daughter. Instead, they faced a judge who had read the viral article and reviewed all the evidence Rhonda had submitted. The judge listened to testimony from Hazel about my competence and stability, from Wanda about my work ethic and determination, from Jasper about my business acumen and the legitimate investment I had secured. The judge reviewed the documented evidence of my parents' false statements and coordinated harassment. When it was Harold's turn to present his case, the judge asked pointed questions about the police report and why he had filed it if he knew I was staying with friends. When Beatrice tried to claim they were just worried parents, the judge referenced specific social media posts and asked if a truly worried parent would publicly shame their child instead of privately seeking help. When their lawyer tried to present the psychiatrist's opinion, the judge noted that the psychiatrist had never actually examined me and dismissed the opinion as worthless. The judge denied the conservatorship petition outright and went further, issuing a formal censure against Harold and Beatrice for filing a frivolous and potentially malicious petition. The judge stated clearly for the record that I appeared to be a competent adult who had been subjected to a campaign of harassment by family members attempting to control her life choices. The judge granted the restraining order against Brock, ordering him to cease all contact with me and to preserve all files related to the intellectual property theft, pending further legal proceedings. I launched my app 2 days later, ahead of Brock's planned launch. The viral article had created massive buzz, and people signed up partly because they believed in the concept and partly because they wanted to support the underdog in the story. 5,000 users in the first week, overwhelmingly positive reviews, media coverage that money couldn't buy. Brock's version launched a week later to zero interest, a buggy copycat that everyone recognized as stolen. His app was dead on arrival, never achieving more than a few hundred downloads before he gave up and shut it down. The day after my launch, I got a call from a second venture capital firm, interested in the next investment round. Then another call, and another. The publicity had made me the most talked about startup founder in the region, and investors wanted in. Within a month, I had closed a second funding round for $300,000 at a company valuation of $5 million. The business that my parents had mocked as childish fantasy was now worth more than I had ever imagined possible. There was a confrontation after the conservatorship hearing, outside the courthouse. Harold tried to approach me, tried to say something about how they had only wanted what was best for me, how things had gotten out of hand. I looked at him, this man who had never told me he was proud of me, who had thrown me out of my home, who had tried to destroy everything I built, and I felt nothing but cold clarity. Beatrice stood next to him, her makeup perfect, her expression a mask of wounded dignity, still performing even though the audience had stopped believing her. I told them the truth, clear and final. You stopped being my parents the night you threw me out with trash bags. You became my enemies the moment you chose money and status over your daughter. I don't want your apologies because they're not real. You're only sorry you lost, not sorry for what you did. You're cut from my life permanently, and if you ever contact me again, I'll add harassment charges to the existing lawsuits. Then I walked away, surrounded by Rhonda and Jasper and Hazel and Wanda. The family I had chosen, the people who had actually shown up when I needed them. Beatrice called after me, tried one last manipulation. We're still your parents. I turned back briefly and said, no, you're strangers who happen to share my DNA. There's a difference. Then I left them standing there, and I never looked back. 6 months after that courthouse confrontation, I'm sitting in my new office, a real office with walls and a door and my name on it, watching the sunset paint the city in shades of orange and pink. My app now has 300,000 active users, people earning money for their families through the microtask platform I created. The company is valued at $12 million, and we're in talks for international expansion. I hired a small team, including Hazel as operations manager because nobody understands logistics and organization like she does, and Wanda as culture consultant because she has more wisdom about treating people with dignity than anyone I've ever met. I moved into a modest but comfortable one-bedroom apartment. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. Every piece of furniture I bought myself, every decoration chosen because I liked it, not because it fit some image my mother wanted to project. I started therapy 3 months ago, working through the trauma of everything that happened, learning to set healthy boundaries and recognize manipulation. The therapist helped me understand that what I experienced was family abuse, that the forced marriage attempt was a form of trafficking, that the coordinated attacks were domestic violence even though they came from parents instead of a romantic partner. The lawsuits against my parents were settled out of court. Their lawyer recommended settlement because the evidence against them was overwhelming, and a trial would only generate more negative publicity. The settlement included a public apology that they never delivered with any sincerity, just a legal statement their lawyer drafted, and payment for damages, including my legal fees and compensation for the harm they caused. I donated every penny of the settlement to Safe Harbor, the women's shelter that gave me a place to stay when I had nothing. The director cried when I handed her the check, said it would fund operations for a year and help dozens of women escape situations like mine. Sterling is facing multiple lawsuits from the women who came forward, and there's a financial crimes investigation into some of his business practices that emerged during the discovery process. Last I heard, his investment career is over, and he's trying to rebuild in a different industry where people don't know his reputation yet. Brock's app failure was just the beginning of his problems. Harold's business never fully recovered from the reputation damage, and Brock is working there now in a diminished role, no longer the golden child destined to inherit an empire, but just another employee trying to keep a struggling company afloat. My parents have tried to reach out multiple times, always through intermediaries, never directly. Darlene called once, apparently tasked with feeling out whether I would be open to reconciliation. I told her the same thing I told the lawyer who sent a letter and the distant cousin who sent a Facebook message. I maintain no contact with Harold and Beatrice Patterson. They are not part of my life and never will be. I learned through mutual acquaintances that my parents tell people we're estranged, using language that suggests it's a mutual disagreement rather than acknowledging what they did. They've never admitted fault, never taken responsibility, never truly apologized for the abuse. I built a chosen family instead. Hazel is the sister I always wanted, someone who shows up, who celebrates my wins and supports me through struggles. Wanda is the mother figure who gives advice without judgment, who believes in me unconditionally. Rhonda became a friend beyond just being my lawyer, someone I have coffee with and text random thoughts to. Jasper evolved from investor to genuine friend, someone who saw my potential when I had nothing and who continues to mentor me as the business grows. I even started dating someone, a kind software engineer named Miles who I met at a tech conference. He comes from a warm, supportive family, the kind where people actually say, "I love you," and mean it, where mistakes are forgiven and differences are accepted. Spending time with his family showed me what healthy love looks like, helped me see just how abnormal my childhood was. Miles is patient with my trauma responses, understands when I need space, celebrates my independence instead of trying to control it. Hez teaching me that partnership can be a source of strength rather than a cage. I gave a talk at a women's entrepreneurship event last month, sharing my story with 200 people who were building their own businesses. Afterward, at least 20 women came up to me privately and shared their own stories of family sabotage, of parents who tried to destroy their dreams, of relatives who couldn't stand to see them succeed. I realized I wasn't alone. That family betrayal, when you try to break free from their expectations, is tragically common. We exchanged contact information, created a support network, promised to help each other the way Hazel and Wanda had helped me. The healing journey has been complicated. At first, I was consumed by anger, replaying every attack, every betrayal, burning with rage at the injustice of it all. Therapy helped me process those feelings without letting them poison me. I learned that anger is a valid response to abuse, but staying angry forever would only hurt me, not them. I learned that forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation, that I can release the emotional burden without ever having a relationship with my parents again. I learned that the best response to people who doubted me wasn't proving them wrong, it was building a life I'm genuinely proud of, regardless of their opinions. I found peace not in my parents' apology, which never truly came, but in the life I built from nothing. Every user who earns money through my app to feed their kids or pay their bills, every message I get from someone saying the platform changed their life, every milestone the company hits, those are the things that matter. I proved to myself that I was always enough, with or without my family's approval. That's the lesson that took the longest to learn. My parents taught me what I didn't want to become. They showed me the emptiness of valuing status over substance, money over love, control over freedom. They demonstrated how people can be so committed to appearances that they destroy the real relationships underneath. They proved that being related by blood doesn't make someone family. That family is about who shows up when you're broken and helps you rebuild. The people who believed in me when I had nothing but 2 trash bags and a dream, those are my real family. Standing here in my office, watching the sunset, I think about that scared girl shivering outside her parents' house on a November night. I think about the trash bags, the freezing cold, the moment when everything I had known was taken away. That night felt like the end of my world, but it was actually the beginning of my life. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually setting you free, breaking the chains you didn't even realize were holding you back. My parents tried to break me, tried to force me into a mold of their creation, tried to destroy me when I refused to comply. Instead, they forged me into steel. Every attack made me stronger. Every betrayal taught me who I could really trust. Every moment of despair that I survived proved I could survive anything. I'm not angry anymore, just free. Free from their expectations, free from their control, free from the need for their approval. My phone rings, pulling me from my thoughts. It's an investor from London, interested in discussing expansion to international markets. I smile, answer the call professionally, and start talking about market analysis and user growth metrics. As I discuss the future of my company, I think one more time about my parents' final words to me. Go live in the streets where you belong, failure. They were wrong about everything, but especially that. I didn't belong in the streets. I belonged right here, building something meaningful, helping people, succeeding on my own terms. The sun sets completely, the city lights start to glow, and I end the call with a handshake agreement to meet in person next month. I pack up my laptop, turn off my office lights, and head home to the apartment I earned, to the life I built, to the future I am creating one day at a time, and am finally, genuinely happy. So let me ask you this. Have you ever had to choose between your family's expectations and your own dreams? Have you ever been told you were a failure by the people who should have believed in you most? Drop your story in the comments because I promise you're not alone. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more real stories about overcoming impossible odds. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they can survive family betrayal and come out stronger on the other side. Thank you for listening to my story, for being part of this community, for supporting people who refuse to give up on their dreams no matter who tries to stop them. I wish you the courage to choose your own path, the strength to survive when people try to break you, and the wisdom to build a life that makes you proud. Remember, family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when you need them most. Choose your family wisely, and never let anyone convince you that you're less than you are. Stay strong, stay true to yourself, and keep fighting for your dreams. I'll see you in the next video.